stars of our show today are our pen test war stories. So Ryan and Matt are active pen testers, and they regularly are breaking into things for hire. And every now and then we get together, and I feel like a lot of times our conversations just fall into telling stories about pen testing, and a lot of times they get bigger audiences and they get repeated and they're fun stories and they're really interesting. And so we talked about it. We thought that it would be fun to bring some of those stories to the greater group and share some of those things. Before we get started, I just want to take some feedback from the audience. Who here has had a pen test or is engaged with pen testers, knows what a penetration test is? We get a show of hands. All right. Handful. Okay. So I don't know that we need to necessarily get into that definition, but Matt and Ryan, do you guys want to just maybe go into real quick, what you do and when you're getting engaged with clients to do pen tests, like what they're initially looking for and kind of what those first conversations start as?
Yeah. So I think, most of us are familiar with at least what a penetration test is, even if we haven't engaged a firm to do it. But essentially, it's kind of the evolution of hunting and detecting threats in your environment, right? You've done your job, you've patched all your systems, you've run your vulnerability scans, and now you're looking for some validation that work that you've put in is effective. And so you come to a firm like SEVN-X and you ask, hey, who's your best liar? Who's your best thief? Can we get them to come try to break into our company? And that's essentially, the penetration testing that we do kind of starts at the outside. So we look at the building, the physical security around your data center, whatever those critical assets are. Sometimes they're digital, sometimes they're, HR filing cabinets. So whatever the case may be, you kind of pick those crown jewels and you say, all right, go.
So with that, I'm assuming that you guys do you always get in somehow, some way, shape or form?
Yeah.
So what's the most common way you get in?
The answer is 90% of the time. Yeah, we find something, and it's either through just, brute force persistence or, just an inability to quit. But I think when you're looking at the physical security, 95% of the time, we're looking at things that are just commonly misconfigured. So, doors, in almost all cases, there's something, right? You can either go under it, you can go over it, you can go around it. I almost never have to break out a set of lock picks because 9 times out of 10, it's either the latch doesn't seat all the way, the hinges are on the outside of the door, the rec sensor's on the wrong side. Like people are like shaking their heads like, yeah, that's definitely my building, right? So
a lot of people nod. Yeah.
A lot of nods of affirmation. Yeah, it's okay. We know.
Yeah, I think from a network standpoint, right? I think externally that you guys all know, right? How do you train users not to click on that email? How do you train users that, Bob calling from Microsoft really doesn't work for Microsoft, doesn't actually need your password. But I think externally, we still see weak passwords are pretty crucial, and weak passwords coupled with, 10 cents a minute to spoof your phone number is the way that we bypass any MFA controls or things like that we see. But I think the difference between what we do and what's more prevalent out in the wild, right, is when we do a pen test, we have our scope. We don't go outside of that scope. We do not want to get in trouble with the authorities, with our customer, with somebody else. But I think the bad guys, right, they don't have to play by those rules. So they're looking for open RDP portals, unpatched firewalls, unpatched VPN portals, vulnerable WordPress sites, right? The list goes on. So, I think our common ways that we get in might be a little bit different than what Scott and his team are seeing, in the real world.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. We were talking about that, in that a lot of the penetration testing, a lot of the benefits of that is getting the attention and the focus of the business, right, on the organization. So some of the things with physical testing, right, that really kind of makes people stand up and take notice, right? When a CEO has pictures of somebody circumventing a door, breaking in something they thought was secure. But it is interesting how that does contrast also, like you're saying too, with some of the real world the breach realities are, right? With web apps and things like that. So, to kind of get into, pick the thread a little bit. Can you tell a story where you almost got caught breaking into a building?
All of them.
I'm going to take the first one here. So the first physical assessment I did with Matt, actually, this is probably 5 or 6 years ago. We're up in the middle of nowhere in Connecticut, and it is midnight, and it is pitch black, and we're parked, and we're just looking over this barbed wire facility, and we're sitting there, and this just so happened that there was a truck that pulled up, stopped at a stop sign, and the lights were just on our truck. It's a black Jeep. Lights are off. We're sitting there just trying to figure out how we're going to get in. They stopped at the stop sign. To me, I'm not, the physical pen tester. And I look at Matt and I said, they're definitely calling the police. And he goes, no, they're not calling the police. You're just, being a weenie. And sure enough, 5 minutes later, police pull up and I'm like, okay, this is how it ends, And, thankfully they were pretty cool. They came up, luckily we had our get out of jail free card. They took our licenses. They took some pictures and they said, okay, have fun. And they left. And then 20 minutes later, we were inside the data center. So, but yeah, that was probably the closest I've.
It is interesting, you get these letters from the clients, right? That says if you catch these people, they're allowed to do what they're doing. And I always wonder what police officer is going to accept that letter as a reason to let you go. Anyway, all right. So how much time do you guys typically spend to plan gaining access? Like, how much time do you do in recon? Days, weeks? Just on average.
So starting with the network penetration testing side. So I think from an external standpoint, it really depends on the organization, right? So I think we like to differentiate our testing approach. Are we coming in as ninjas, in the dark of night, going low and slow, avoiding controls? Or are we, pirate ship coming in the middle of the night or, broad daylight, cannons from the beach from a mile away? So, generally our engagements, and maybe Matt can keep me honest here, but it's generally about a week of reconnaissance, just confirming scope, making sure we're good to go. These are all the usernames, the emails that we were able to find. This is the email convention, all that good stuff. These are things we like to target from a social engineering standpoint. And then, typically most of our engagements are about a week for the external testing.
Okay.
I think from an internal testing standpoint, so that insider thread, we plug in and we have pretty minimal information. And I would say it varies, but, most organizations that haven't been through the rigor of a pen test, it really doesn't take us very long to get a foothold. I think organizations that have been through it before, have more of a mature cybersecurity program. Obviously, it takes a little bit longer, right? One of the things we talk about a lot is if as part of that kickoff conversation, we talk about your NAC solution, we're looking at each other saying, oh, this is going to be a long week. So definitely something we recommend. But if not, we're able to plug in. We typically have some pretty good success.
So want to talk about a story. Yeah, sorry. Wanted to ask a story. What is the story about one of your most impactful findings? Like something that you did in the pen test that really changed the way your client looked at their security posture.
Well, I'm going to answer this question with a survey from everybody in the room here. What you know about your password policy at your organizations? 8 characters and above. Show of hands. Couple. Put that down, Mike. Okay. 10 characters and above. Okay, we got a couple. 12 characters and above. We got a few. Okay, cool. So one of the things that we do for a lot of organizations that we work with is we do what we call a password audit. So if we're able to get access, if we're able to compromise a domain admin, right? If we're able to get to that level of access, we will often have a conversation that says, would you like us to audit the organization's passwords to see if there's something that, you guys should have in your back pocket to make things better? And, at this point, our password cracker can get through every single combination of 8-character passwords in 3 hours. So if we're able to get a hold of a password hash, 8 hours, if it's an 8-character password, we can recover that clear text value. So I think most people know, right? 8 characters and above, right? And everybody, I'm sure, has gotten some pushback. But when we're able to show that information to non-technical folks, right, and say, hey, it's not, this is the reality. In 8 hours or in 3 hours, any 8-character password, right? If it goes to 9 characters, it gets a little bit more complex, 10 characters, 11 characters, 12 characters. So, I think those findings, like you mentioned, right, if you can show an executive how easy it is to get into a building with video and picture evidence, it's pretty impactful. If you can explain why it's important to have some more length and complexity in your password, which we're able to do, sometimes it's 85-90% of the password hashes we're able to get a hold of, we can crack. It goes a long way in making a splash.
I'm going to switch gears here for a minute. One of the things that we talked about was also, working with you guys on incident response. So, maybe we could, you just give us some insight into, some of your interactions with ransomers.
The one thing that I kind of stress with anytime you're in a breach situation is get somebody that's been a breach coach before, that has had this, interaction with these people before, kind of understands where they're coming from. To them, it's business, and you have to kind of treat it the same way, right? There's a cost for them. There's an overhead for them. They have to cover their costs. So you can't insult them, but at the same time, you have to make a number offer that's within the payable scope for the organization.
You have follow up on that? Yeah. So I know, something people ask all the time is, should I pay? Why do you pay? Should I not pay? Could you maybe just elaborate a little bit on what factors came into play that, created a payment situation?
Yeah. So here's the deal. You're told not to pay, right? Oh, if you pay it just proliferates this crime and people will continue to do ransomware because, people are paying. And yes, that's true. But if you're at risk of going out of business, what are your options, right? So yeah, it's going to continue if you pay, but you're going to go out of business if you don't. Well, now we have something to talk about. So SEVN-X, our blanket policy is not a don't ever pay ever. It's it depends. And there's strategy behind that too, right? So if you can get away with not paying, certainly don't give bad people bad money, right? Don't throw good money after bad. But if there is some reason, right, that you don't have good backups, you didn't partner with Arraya, so you don't have a backup solution in place at all. I don't know what the case may be, but there are times out there where you need to get the data back. There's also times out there where you have military data or HIPAA data or something else where if that data were released, you would be under fire for a totally different reason. And so you're paying to keep the data quiet rather than to get it back in an unencrypted state. So we really do a lot to analyze what was taken, how it was taken, and whether or not it makes sense to pay the ransom. And if it does, then we negotiate. And if it doesn't, then there's an art to walking away without inciting more violence.
Yeah, I think one thing to add to what Matt said is that now we're seeing it's not just recovering, right? Because some of these ransomware groups, they're taking the data offline, then encrypting. So if you can recover from backups, they still might say, hey, we're going to let your top A, B, C, D, E customers know we have this information. So that's something to keep in mind as well. It's not maybe just recovery, it's also reputation. The other thing that's interesting to think about is, on the pay or not pay, it's who is it, right? There are organizations, countries where you're not allowed to pay, even if you feel like you need to, based on if they're associated with, terrorist organizations or things like that. So again, to Matt's point, a breach coach, your insurance company, people that have been around the block, right? At this point, I think everybody has at least a few people they can lean on and make sure to pick up that phone as soon as you can.
So thanks, guys. one of the things that I'm taking away from this conversation is that password complexity is still not being enforced as strongly as it should be across
Service
client
accounts.
base. Okay.
Yes.
The other thing that I'm taking away too is just interesting, talking about how not really very long time period where you guys are doing recon to get in when you think about how your success rates, right? And then you can kind of compare that to what the real world is like for the bad actors, right? They don't really have a timeline. They're not on a week schedule. Those are my kind of takeaways. I was going to ask you guys, if I could share with the group here something you want to make sure they take away from the conversation today.
Yeah, I guess mine will be short. I think, the basics are still important. Password complexity, making sure there's not stuff out there that shouldn't be, right? Developers aren't opening up test systems to the internet. The other thing too is, you see some of these new things out there, Chat GPT, people are asking questions with sensitive information.
Very true.
I think it's just the basics are important. There's a lot of really, really interesting, very impactful technologies, controls, information, things that you can use. Those are great, but just, making sure the password policy enforces a long password, multi-factor, training people, the basics are just really important. And then rinse, repeat, right?
I think for me, the big takeaway here is that it's all about defense in depth, right? So you can have, a good firewall, and if that firewall fails for whatever reason, what's going to catch this traffic that goes through it? Or you could have a good door lock on the front, right? But does the alarm go off, right? So think about your security like an onion. Try to figure out where your layers are and where your tripwires are for each of those layers. And as you build out your security programs, as you build out your architectures and adopt your devices, just look at, where your controls might fail and where other controls can compensate or pick up, where other ones might be deficient.
Awesome. Well, thanks everyone for coming. A few little just last minute things. Just want to make sure I thank Ryan and Matt at SEVN-X. They've got great experience as you've heard. They do pen tests, incident response retainers, and a lot of other cyber advisory services. We work with them at Arraya as a partner. Go to them direct. As well as wanted to make sure I brought up the Randori attack service review. If you want to schedule a free attack service review, please meet with Kevin Dargan here, Ryan Taylor, account reps from Arraya can help you get that sorted out. So thanks everybody.
Thank you.